Ah, the adorable little Norn Grey Rat, little sister to Rudeus and the daughter of Paul and Zenith Grey Rat. Norn is easily one of my favorite character studies of the Mushoku Tensei novel series. While her early years are pretty simple, being raised in a small village, that all changes the moment she is swept up in the displacement incident, torn from her mother's hands and thrown into a life following her father around searching for her family. Welcome back to yet another edition of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation anime skipped content. In this video, we focus in on the skipped content surrounding Norn and her eventual reuniting with Rudeus Grey Rat. Obviously, from the anime only's perspective, the reuniting didn't go very well. But it missed a significant part where Rudeus himself tries to mend his relationship with Norn, and failing miserably. It also gives us a deeper look into the mental state of Norn herself, who has grown massively attached to her only pillar for so many years. Yes, her father, Paul. But before that, let's get a little refresher out of the way. Following the displacement incident, since Paul was currently at the time carrying Norn, the two of them were transported together. Paul would quickly establish where they were at by his surroundings before going to a nearby town. There he goes to the Adventure Guild and accepts a delivery order. This is in order to gain a loaned horse for free, even though yes, he doesn't actually plan on fulfilling the request. Instead, he was going a completely different direction. Home. The trip itself was very tough for Norn. She fell incredibly ill halfway through the trip. She wasn't used to horseback riding or traveling endlessly for night and day. After taking some time to pretty much nurse her back to health, they eventually arrive at the Fatoa region in 2 months' time. Once there, obviously, Paul was devastated, knowing full well of the effects of a teleportation circle from his time in the labyrinth. But still, something snapped him out of it. It was Norn. She wasn't worried at all, because she had him, her dad. He couldn't show any weakness. He had to stay calm and confident that everything would be alright. After this, he'd search for information, meet Alphonse, establish the search and rescue squad, and travel the world until he arrived at Milshin. Over time, saving many people and seeing many dead, Paul would slowly fall into a state of depression. He never knew if he'd find his family or if he'd find them dead. This thought constantly haunted him as he became a target of nobles, surviving family members, and even his own squad. Again, all while losing hope that he would ever find his family. It seemed hopeless, and the anxiety led him to drinking morning and night. The pain was just too much for him to even sober up. That's when Norn spoke up. Daddy, guess what? Guess what happened when I was outside? No matter how drunk he might be, Norn would always chatter happily at him. The sweet little kid was all he had left of his family now. She was the reason why he didn't go to the Begric continent or the Demon continent, all in order to keep her safe and not leave her behind. What's up, Norn? Did something good happen? Yeah, I almost fell down in the street outside, but this big bald guy helped me out. And he gave me this. Look. With a big smile, Norn showed him the bright red apple in her hands. It sure looked fresh and juicy. Oh yeah? Well, lucky you. Did you say thank you like a good girl? Yeah. When I said thanks, the baldy patted me on the head. No kiddin'. I guess he ran into a really nice person. But you shouldn't call him baldy, okay? Some guys are really kind of sensitive about their hair. Chatting with his daughter was always so fun. Norn was a light of his life. If anyone tried to harm her, he'd end them, even if it meant picking a fight with the Pope of the Mills Church. Cutting forward, Rudeus would arrive at Milshin and be reunited with Paul. They would have a fight, but then they would make up, and Rudeus would soon find a ticket to get off the Mills continent. This is where we get to the skip chapter, 1 week in Milshin, where Rudeus heads to the headquarters of the search and rescue squad to give Paul his plans. The headquarters itself was a perfectly ordinary 2-story building. It didn't take me long to find my father. He was hard at work in what seemed like a conference room, discussing something or another with roughly a dozen other men. I can make out snatches of the conversation from outside. It seems like they were preparing for a large operation of some kind. From the way Paul looked the other day, I assumed that he spent every day in Milshin either getting drunk or nursing a hangover. But maybe my timing had just been bad. Right now, he was a picture of a focused, competent leader. I was impressed despite myself. At least until someone alluded to the fact that he had skipped a month's worth of meetings while on his massive bender. From the sound of things, it was only yesterday that he abruptly gotten motivated again. It was most likely that Paul wanted to show me his better side. In other words, he had gotten back to work because of me. Goodness gracious, the boys do love showing off for me. With a theatrical sigh, I decided to wait for Paul to find a little free time. Sitting around would be boring, so he opted to wander around the building for a while. After a few minutes of exploration, I came across my little sister, Norn, at play. She was in a room that seemed to be serving as a nursery, playing blocks with a bunch of other kids around her age. Hey there, I said, raising a hand in greeting as her eyes met mine. Norn started in surprise, then scowled and hurled a wooden block in her hand, which I managed to catch. Go away. This didn't strike me as the friendliest way to say hello. Had I done anything to make her upset at me? The only thing that came to mind was the time that I beat the crap out of Paul before her eyes. Yeah, that probably had something to do with it. Father and I made up with each other, Norn, I protested gently. In response, she shouted, "You liar," and scampered off as fast as her little legs would carry her. Apparently, my baby sister hated my guts now. That was a bit of a downer. After being thoroughly rejected by his sister, Rudeus would meet up with Viera and Shira. He had them relay a message to Paul that he'd be leaving Milshin in a week, at which point Shira set him up on a dinner date. While Paul was extremely busy trying to catch up for the entire last month that he was in a drunk stupor, she claimed Paul was full of life when he talked about Rudeus and hoped that he'd agree to have the dinner. Hearing this, Rudeus agreed, and then several days later, they had the dinner. When he arrived at the destination, the Lazy Millis, the whole thing about reservations got him a little nervous. As it turned out, though, Lazy Millis was a perfectly ordinary place. It was a standalone bar and restaurant, not part of an inn. Most of the clientele seemed to be relatively respectable locals. When I gave my name to the waiter up front, he brought me and Edis over to the table immediately. Paul was already sitting at the table with an awkward smile on his face, along with a very grumpy-looking Norn, as she's not happy that he's coming there. Sorry, are we late? Nah, sorry about this, kiddo. Shira got a little carried away for some reason. I told her our usual place would be fine, but nothing wrong with a change of pace every once in a while, right? I started to pull out a chair. Then I stopped as I noticed Edis was looking rather grumpy herself. This technically wasn't the first time she had met Paul, but maybe introducing them would be a good idea. Father, this is Edis. As I told you the other day, she's Philip's daughter, and a member of the Boreas. Oh, right. Cutting me off mid-sentence, Paul rose to his feet and turned to Edis. He straightened up and put one hand to his chest, then lowered his head slightly. It was a practiced bow, no less smooth than Philip's. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, miss. I'm Paul Greyrat, Rudeus' father. Taken aback, Edis tried to glance at me, but couldn't manage to totally break eye contact with my father. I'm Edis Greyrat. Sir, the expression on her face was still grumpy. Nonetheless, she grabbed the ends of her dress and gave an awkward little curtsy. It felt like she had missed her chance to start screaming or throwing punches. I had to admit, I was impressed with Paul. Apparently, he had learned a little thing or two about handling girls in his years of being a womanizer. But since when could he pull off a bow like that? All right then, why don't we all sit down? In any case, our family dinner got underway without any bloodshed. Edis and I settled into our seats. For the moment, Edis was keeping quiet, but it was obvious that she'd bare her fangs in an instant if things took a wrong turn. Paul still looked a bit uncomfortable. And as for Norn, well, she hadn't even glanced at me yet. Long story short, the mood wasn't so great. Maybe it really was a mistake to bring Edis with me. It seemed like I wasn't the only one that found the situation awkward. After a few moments of silence, Paul looked to Norn with a troubled expression on his face. Come on, kiddo. Your big brother's here, you see? Why don't you say hi to him? No, I don't want to have dinner with some jerk who punched my daddy. Edis scowled and started to open her mouth, but Paul was quicker. Don't say that, kiddo. Sometimes daddy deserves a punch or two. But you didn't do anything wrong. As Norn said this, she puffed out her little cheeks in an adorable show of indignation. Your big brother and I already made up, okay? Isn't that right, Rudy? Oh boy, he was throwing this over to me? Well, maybe this was an opportunity of sorts. An opportunity to demonstrate my wit and charm. Oh, absolutely, I said with a smile. Want to kiss and prove it? Huh? For some reason, that line went over like a lead balloon. Was Paul that opposed to the idea of swap and spit with his own son? Actually, I couldn't blame the guy. I didn't want to kiss him either. Maybe we should just forget that I ever said it. Anyways, the two of us are friends again now, Norn. Why don't you just make up with your big brother too? No way. Paul patted Norn on the head as she pouted. That golden hair of hers was really pretty though. It reminded me of Zenith. Come to think of it, she used to sulk and storm just like this whenever something ticked her off. Maybe Norn inherited that bad habit from her mother. After submitting to Paul's petting for a little while, the kid abruptly turned and glared at me. She had to tilt her head back to look at me in the face, so the overall effect was more adorable than intimidating. Daddy's trying really hard. Since his comments seemed to be directed at me, I responded as gently as possible. Yeah, I know he is. He doesn't kiss any other girls or anything, so I've heard. I'm sorry I doubted him. He's also really nice to me too. Norn's eyes were filling up with tears. Crap. Did I say something mean? Please don't start bawling, kid. Daddy always looks like he wants to cry. Flustered by Norn's obvious distress, Paul and I looked at each other uncertainly. Wait, really? Well, I feel sorry for him. Neither Paul nor Rudeus had anything to say to that. How could you beat him up like that? You're so mean. Looking at Norn's face, I had to fight the urge to heave a long, heavy sigh. Paul and Norn had been teleported together. I knew all about that now. She'd gotten very sick during their journey back to the Fatoa region, and was nearly attacked by monsters several times along the way. And it was her father who protected her from all those dangers. With her mother, maid, and sister missing, and her heart bursting with anxiety, Paul was the only person that she could rely on. For years, he was the only family she had left. And then some stranger showed up out of nowhere, knocked him down, and started punching him in the face. That would be enough to traumatize most kids her age. Paul spoke up. Norn, look, that was all my... It's all right, father, Rudeus interrupted. He thought if she was a little older, the three of us might find a way to talk through this. At her age, though, that was probably impossible. Both Paul and I had made mistakes and jumped to conclusions. We reconciled and acknowledged our faults, but you couldn't expect a child to understand that. Rudeus spoke up. Norn's still very young, and if I were in her shoes, I don't think I'd forgive a jerk who punched you either. He thought, It was sad that Norn would hate me, but there wasn't much I could do about that. We just have to talk things through in a few years down the road. Once she was older, I was sure that she'd understand. Time is not an infinite resource, but it can heal at least some wounds. Paul didn't give up on it though. No, it's not all right. You guys might be the only siblings you got left, okay? I want you to be good to each other. As the meaning of those words sunk in, I frowned at my father. That's a little ominous, don't you think? Yeah, you're right. Sorry. Well, that's no good at all. The mood was getting heavier by the minute. It seemed like time to change the subject. By the way, Father, what's good here? I skipped lunch today, so I'm starving. Not the smoothest transition, but Paul picked up on it. With a strange smile, he took his cue. Let's see. They got some damn tasty seafood stew with fresh fish from the sea down south. Oh, and the beef's good too. They raise a lot of cattle in the farms around here, you know? It actually tastes pretty different from the Austrian kind, especially since they tend to boil it. Gives it a real nice rich flavor. Oh, I gotta try that. All the meat on the Demon Continent was seriously foul. You said it was mostly cuts from great tortoise meat, right? Yeah, most monsters do taste pretty nasty. The conversation was finally starting to pick up some steam, but Norn still had her head turned away. She only responded when Paul said something to her, refusing to even glance in my direction. I'd more or less resigned myself at this point, but it still kinda stung, you know? Of course, this was the exact same thing I had done to Paul just a few days ago. I felt terrible about that in retrospect. Edis wasn't too pleased by Norn's attitude, judging from the way that she was staring at her. I really didn't want this to turn into a fight, but it was just best to leave things be for now. Oh, right, there was something I meant to ask you, Father. Yeah? What's that? Do you know anyone by the name of Gash Brosh? Nope. Where'd you hear that name? I took a chance to tell Paul about Rajur's letter, and the mysterious friend who had written it for us. I made a rough copy of the emblem on the wax seal, so I took it out and showed it to him. A sheep, a hawk, and a sword, huh? Looks like the family crest of a paladin. I don't think I've heard the name Gash Brosh before, though. Not that I'm familiar with all the nobles or anything. I see. Do you think Shiera knows anything about him? Dunno. I'll ask her later. It wasn't reassuring that he'd never heard of the guy, but we just have to wait and see. With that topic exhausted, Paul and I went back to chatting about anything that came to mind. Eventually, we landed on the subject of my 10th birthday. According to Paul, the monsters in the forest outside of Buena Village had grown much more active about a month beforehand. Paul and Zenith had been so busy trying to keep the situation under control that they didn't have time to worry about my presence. They finally managed to clear up the forest the day before my birthday. But just as they were getting things ready to send over, the calamity took place. As she listened to all this, Edis pouted with her lips pursed. Come to think of it, she looked really sad when she found out that Paul wasn't going to come to my party. Just out of curiosity, what were you planning on sending me? I was going to give you a pair of gauntlets. I felt a little guilty since I had just found them in the back of our storehouse. But these were magic items that were from the bottom of a labyrinth. Those things were light as a feather. They never fit me, but I thought they might look good on you, Rudy. No kidding. I didn't know that you had anything like that lying around. Yep, Zenith said that hers was a secret. But sometimes I've noticed that Lilia was looking at this locked box with a smile on her face. I'm guessing that was for you too. A box? Rudy's thought, now that made me curious. What could have been inside that thing? Not that there's much point in thinking about it now. Whatever it was, it's long gone now. After this, we somehow got into the topic of Zenith's family. They were evidently well known amongst the Millis nobility, and had a long history of producing talented and righteous knights. Unfortunately, my grandparents had basically disowned Zenith when she left home, so they weren't exactly enthusiastic about helping search for her at first. They changed their tune completely once they took a look at Norn, though. This world was different from my old one in a lot of ways, but the power of a cute grandkid was evidently universal. I wonder if they give you more money if I stop by. I think that would probably backfire. Yeah, you're right. Rudy's thought I could try to act like a sweet little tyke for them, but my true nature would probably reveal itself in time. It wasn't worth the risk. Not long after this exchange, the waiter finally brought our food to the table. Okay, let's dig in, said Paul, his fork hovering theatrically in the air. What first? This does look appetizing, murmured Edis, studying the spread with her shining eyes. She seemed more like Paul's child than I was, honestly. Then again, Paul and Philip were cousins, so maybe it wasn't too bizarre. In any case, this seemed like a golden opportunity to improve Norn's image of me slightly. Cut it out, Daddy. Your manners are... You gotta pray before you eat. The two of us spoke almost simultaneously. Norn looked over to me, surprised, but then turned away sulkily a second later. Haha. Okay, kids. Fine. Paul scratched his head ruefully, and Edis looked a bit reluctant, but they both leaned back in their chairs for a moment. The four of us proceeded to say a short Millis-style prayer. All this involved was clapping your hands together and closing your eyes for a few seconds. Edis and I wasn't believers, and Paul probably wasn't one either, but this was just good table manners in this world. When in Rome and all that, you know. We went through the motions without complaint. For some reason, it seemed like Edis and Norn were slightly in better moods after this. We enjoyed our meal while chatting about nothing of real importance. Paul and I did most of the talking, of course. Norn never looked in my direction, and, for her part, Edis kept mostly silent. Paul did start to speak to her every now and then, but the waves of hostility she admitted were strong enough that he always thought better of it. It was probably wise of him not to poke the beehive. As Edis and I left the restaurant together, I heard her mutter, I guess he kept himself under control this time, under her breath. I didn't even want to think of how she might have reacted if Paul had yelled at me again, let alone taken a swing at me. But since we hadn't had any of that, her desire to murder him might have faded. In that sense, at least, it was a productive use of our time. Cutting forward, later that week, Rudeus would give his goodbyes to Paul. before receiving an ominous warning about the fate of the Borges family. Just before Rudeus would depart, Paul turned around and spoke to Norn, who was standing behind him. "Come on, Norn. Say goodbye to your big brother." "Don't wanna." Norn didn't want to move from her hiding spot behind her father. Half her face peeked out, though. Talk about adorable. I found myself wondering if she'd grow up to be a beauty just like her mother. "I don't know how long it's going to take, Norn, but let's meet again someday." "Don't wanna." Right. Until the very end, my little sister refused to look me in the face. Smiling awkwardly, I headed back to our carriage. And just like that, our party left the city of Milsham behind. And that is the skipped chapters of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel Volume 5. Volume 5 is just full of just tons of skipped content. It really feels like they adapted maybe like a quarter of the entire thing. So there's tons of stuff in here to get into. And one of the things that I loved the most was getting an insight into Norn. Yeah, the other side to Volume 5 really is around Paul. Getting that different telling of Paul's perspective. But again, the other side is, oh wow, reading through this, I'm going, crap, they actually had this little moment where he tried to connect to Norn. And I do like the fact that, yes, most of this is just kind of assumptions that Rudeus is making. He's making the assumption that based on what happened to Norn and Paul, that Norn basically puts Paul on this pedestal, this grandiose pedestal, and anybody that messes with him, she deems as being like a demon. And so, yes, her first impression of Rudeus that she hasn't seen since she was an infant. Remember back in Buena Village, Rudeus left when they were still babies. So she has no memories of Rudeus. So the moment that he finally sees her again, and she's this little kid, she doesn't know who he is. Just some dude that showed up and started punching Paul, her father, that she adores. This person that the only person that she has left. But I do also like that aspect of there almost being a codependency between the two of them. Obviously, being Paul's daughter, she depends on him. She needs him to help him. He's, taken her back home, nursed her back to health, has been carrying her around everywhere, will not leave her behind. Again, he had a lot of people that were criticizing Paul because he wouldn't go to the other continents. Go to the Demon Continent. Go to the Begarit Continent. But he doesn't go there because he can't take her with him. Those are too dangerous to bring a daughter. He's chosen to stay there and focus on there and try to send out people because he's afraid of leaving her behind. He needs her, technically. The only thing keeping him somewhat together, as he's constantly thinking about how I can't find my family. When am I going to find my family members dead? I have people berating me. Why weren't you here on time? Why couldn't you have saved this person? You were supposed to save them. Where's my family? The nobles are coming after him, trying to kill him. His party members, the search and rescue squad, some of the members are getting angry at him because they're being attacked on the street because the nobles are angry. All this is bearing down on him. The only thing keeping him sane is Norn. Her bright chatter that she's giving him is what keeps him together. It's like his angel that's keeping him from just completely dying. I like that codependency. And I like that at least Rudeus acknowledges that he came in and inserted himself in a situation, and that's why she hates my guts. And it sucks to hear that he's willing to say, look, I'm just going to have to give up. There's no way that I can talk her into forgiving me. I'll just have to wait for another time. In the future, down the road, several years later, hopefully we'll be reunited, and then she'll be old enough that she'll understand. She'll understand the words that I'm telling her. Right now, I'm just a demon. And no matter what I say, it's not going to get to her head. She's not going to understand how people have fallings out and come back together. She's just going to assume that Dad's just being forced to say this, or you're lying. None of this can be true because I just got done seeing you punching his face into the ground. There's no way you can be a good person. And it's really sad. It's really sad. Like I said, just more on the idea that this is their first time seeing each other in so long. There's no telling the next time they'll see each other. What if it's 20 years down the road? What if it's 30 years down the road? When is the next time he's going to see her? That's the question mark. And it's sad to not even have a brief moment of being able to spend time together, play, talk, get to know each other, because there's this barrier that was placed there, all because of this one massive mistake back here. This massive mistake that both Paul and Rudeus themselves actually recognize. It's such good stuff. Like I said, I think my biggest love for Norn is in the idea that, yes, she's cute. She's adorable. She's adorable. She wants to be protected. But it's also in the idea of a child that lost everything. I can't even imagine somebody who is just, a couple of years old, suddenly being transported somewhere else and having nothing. Just constantly following her father around as he's looking and trying to do his job to find people, and she has nothing left there. But anyways, I'm going to stop talking before I start talking about something that's come later on. But we'll see. We'll see how things pan out going forward. I think this is definitely a good little chapter to get into for now. But anyways, that is your skip content for Norn in the Mushoku Tensei JavaScript Incarnation novel series. I hope you guys enjoyed this video as always. If you did, make sure that like button down below, comment. Let me know what you think of Norn. Do you think she's the best little sister? I know there's a lot of Aisha folks, which is kind of sad because yes, technically for the animated series, you get this little brief moment of Norn being mean to Rudeus, and then jump forward and we get to see Aisha, and she's a total spitfire and so goofy. And it's like, which sister do you like most from the anime? It's kind of a bad competition. But she's adorable, so I definitely love her. But additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe buttons get all my content. I do news reviews, first impressions, top list if it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you want to support the channel more, I have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, membership button down below. Greatly, greatly appreciate it, but it does. And y'all take care.